I find myself in an incredibly complicated and emotionally taxing situation, and I'm at a loss for what to do. My father is terminally ill, and there's a whirlwind of drama surrounding his inheritance. I'll do my best to explain the intricate web of relationships and events that have led to this point. Some background. My mother, Claire, passed away when I was 10 years old. She had been battling breast cancer for years, and her death hit both my father and me like a ton of bricks. Mom had always been the glue that held our family together, with her warm smile and knack for finding the silver lining in any situation. Her absence left a gaping hole in our lives. For the next few years, it was just my dad and me against the world. We muddled through our grief together, learning to navigate a life without Mom. During this time, we grew incredibly close. Dad threw himself into being both mother and father to me. He'd wake up early to make me breakfast before school, attend every soccer game and school play, and stay up late helping me with homework. We had a standing Friday night movie tradition, complete with homemade popcorn and root beer floats. Those years were tough, but the bond we forged was unshakable, or so I thought. When I was 13, my dad, Tom, started dating Paige, now in her 50s. She worked at the same accounting firm as him, and they met at a company picnic. Paige was cheerful and outgoing, a complete contrast to my dad's more reserved nature. At first, I was suspicious of her. No one could ever replace my mom. But Paige made an effort to connect with me. She'd bring me little gifts and ask about my interests. She seemed genuinely happy when Dad and I recounted stories from our past. For a while, I was cautiously optimistic that we could form a new kind of family. Paige has a daughter, Lily, who's 2 years younger than me. Lily and I got along okay as kids, but were never super close. She was into dance and fashion, while I was more of a bookworm and outdoor enthusiast. We were cordial to each other, but didn't have much in common. Paige also has a much younger sister, Annie, who's 10 years younger than me. Annie was still in high school when Paige and my dad got married, so she wasn't around much at first. My dad and Paige tied the knot when I was 15. The wedding was a lavish affair, much more extravagant than anything my mom would have wanted. I remember feeling a twinge of discomfort at the opulence, but I pushed it aside. Dad seemed happy, and that's what mattered, right? For a while, things were relatively stable. But as the years passed, I started noticing changes in Paige, and in my dad. Paige became increasingly preoccupied with material possessions and social status. She was always pushing for bigger houses, fancier cars, more exotic vacations. My dad, who had always been frugal and practical, started giving in to her demands more and more. I think he was terrified of losing another partner, of being alone again. I remember one particular incident that highlighted this shift. For my 16th birthday, my dad had promised to take me on a camping trip, just the two of us, like we used to do before Mom died. I was really looking forward to it. But a week before we were supposed to leave, Paige announced she had booked a surprise trip to a luxury resort in Bali. My dad, caught between his promise to me and his desire to please Paige, chose the Bali trip. I was crushed, but I didn't say anything. I didn't want to be the reason for any tension in their marriage. When I moved out for college at 18, I was secretly relieved. The atmosphere at home had become stifling. Paige's materialistic values clashed with the down-to-earth upbringing my parents had given me. Whenever I visited, she'd make subtle digs about my choice of major, English literature, not practical enough in her eyes, my second-hand clothes, or my summer job at a local bookstore. "Wouldn't you rather intern at your father's firm?" she'd say, her voice dripping with faux concern. "You need to start thinking about your future, dear." These comments, coupled with the growing distance between my dad and me, made me reluctant to come home. Our once close relationship had become strained. When we talked on the phone, our conversations felt forced and superficial. Gone were the days of heart-to-heart talks and inside jokes. I could sense my dad's disappointment in my infrequent visits, but I didn't know how to bridge the gap that had formed between us. Fast forward to the present. I'm 28 now, working as a high school English teacher, a job I love, but that Paige clearly finds unimpressive. My dad is 62 and was recently diagnosed with late-stage pancreatic cancer. The doctors have only given him about 6 months to live. The news hit me like a freight train. Despite our estrangement, the thought of losing my dad is unbearable. I immediately flew home to be with him. At first, Paige put on a show of being the grieving, supportive wife. She fussed over my dad's comfort and spoke in hushed, sympathetic tones. But as soon as the topic of my dad's final arrangements and will came up, Her mask slipped. My dad, looking frailer than I'd ever seen him, told me he wanted to leave a significant portion of his estate to me. He spoke of regrets, how he wished we hadn't grown apart, how he wanted to make sure I was taken care of. In that moment, I saw a glimmer of my old dad, the one who had been my rock after Mom died. I was deeply touched that despite everything, he still cared about my well-being. Paige's reaction was explosive. She flew into a rage, screaming that I didn't deserve a penny because I had abandoned the family. Her face contorted with fury as she spat out that all of my dad's money should go to her and Lily, his real family now. The venom in her voice when she said real family made my blood run cold. My dad tried to calm her down, his voice weak but firm. "Paige, please, Jack is my son. Of course he's getting an inheritance." But Paige was beyond reason. She threatened divorce if my dad left me anything in the will. "I'll contest it," she snarled. "I'll drag this through the courts for years if I have to." I was stunned by her brutality. This woman who had once brought me thoughtful gifts and asked about my day was now showing her true colors, and they were ugly. To behave this way while my dad is literally on his deathbed? I was unable to understand it. The atmosphere in the house has been unbearably tense ever since. Paige is constantly trying to poison my dad against me. She whispers in his ear when she thinks I can't hear, telling him I'm only here for the money, that I don't really care about him. It's so far from the truth that it makes my heart ache. I love my dad, flaws and all. I'm devastated that he's dying, and I want nothing more than to reconnect with him in the time we have left. The other day, I overheard a disturbing phone conversation between Paige and her youngest sister Annie, 21F. They were huddled in the guest room, voices low but intense. I couldn't make out all the details, but it was clear they were plotting something to discredit me in my dad's eyes. Annie said something about making him slip up, and Paige responded with a cold laugh, saying, "Tom will never forgive him if this works." I'm deeply worried about what they're planning. I don't trust either of them, but I don't know how to protect myself without coming across as paranoid or money-hungry, exactly what Paige accuses me of being. In all of this mess, the only unexpected ally I've found is my stepsister Lily, 26F. She approached me quietly one evening when Paige was out. "I know what my mom is doing is wrong," she whispered, her eyes darting nervously to the door. "I'm on your side, Jack, but I'm scared to speak up against her." I appreciated Lily's support, but I understood her reluctance to get involved. Paige's wrath is a formidable thing. I feel so lost and alone in all of this. The money isn't even my primary concern, though I won't lie, the financial security would be nice, especially given my teacher's salary. What I really want is to spend these final months with my dad without all this toxic drama swirling around us. I want to repair our relationship, to tell him all the things I've held back over the years, but Paige's constant interference makes that nearly impossible. I'm at a crossroads, unsure of how to proceed. Should I confront Paige about the conversation I overheard? Should I warn my dad about what might be coming? Or should I try to keep my head down and avoid engaging, focusing solely on my dad? Any advice would be immensely appreciated. I'm drowning in this situation, and I don't know which way to turn. Update 1. I want to thank everyone who took the time to comment on my last post with advice and words of support. Your kindness has been a lifeline during this tumultuous time. A lot has transpired over the past couple of weeks, and I felt compelled to provide an update on the situation. I wish I could say things improved, but the reality is that the situation deteriorated significantly before any positive changes occurred. The plot I overheard Paige and Annie discussing came to fruition, and it was even more twisted and malicious than I had imagined. About a week after my initial post, Annie started showing up at the house with increasing frequency. She was constantly maneuvering to get me alone, trying to engage me in conversation. At first, I attempted to be polite while maintaining my distance, but her persistence was unnerving. She'd corner me in the kitchen while I was making coffee or appear suddenly in the hallway as I was heading to my room. One particularly difficult evening, when my dad was having a really rough day and was heavily medicated, Annie made her move. She found me in the kitchen, where I was preparing some soup for my dad. Without warning, she pressed herself against me, her hands roaming inappropriately as she whispered suggestive comments in my ear. I was shocked and disgusted. I firmly told her to back off and quickly left the room. my heart pounding with a mixture of anger and anxiety. The next day, all hell broke loose. Annie went to my dad, putting on an Oscar-worthy performance of a young woman wronged. Through carefully crafted tears, she spun a tale of how I had been secretly dating her for months, had gotten her pregnant, and then coerced her into getting an abortion. She claimed that I had come on to her aggressively the night before, taking advantage of her long-standing feelings for me. It was all a web of vicious lies, but Annie's performance was disturbingly convincing. She had fabricated an extensive trail of evidence, fake texts, doctored photos, even a forged receipt from an abortion clinic. Paige, of course, backed her up entirely, claiming she had suspected something was going on for a while, but hadn't wanted to believe it of me. My dad, weakened by his illness and the strong medications he was on, believed them. The look of disappointment and anger on his face is something I'll never forget. He started yelling at me, his voice hoarse but filled with fury. "How could you do this?" he demanded. "To your own aunt? I thought I raised you better than this. You're no son of mine." The words cut deep, reopening old wounds of our estrangement. I tried desperately to defend myself, to explain that it was all a lie, but Paige and Annie had clearly planned this meticulously. They had an answer for every protest, a counter for every point I tried to make. I was completely blindsided and floundering, unsure how to prove my innocence against such an elaborate scheme. My dad declared that he was cutting me out of the will entirely. "I won't leave my money to someone who would take advantage of family like this," he said, his voice trembling with emotion. "I'm ashamed of you, Jack." I was devastated. It wasn't even about the inheritance at that point, though I'd be lying if I said the thought of Paige and Annie succeeding in their scheme didn't infuriate me. What truly broke my heart was that my dad, the man who had been my hero growing up, could believe I was capable of something so horrific. After everything we'd been through together, how could he not see through their lies? I was ready to give up. The weight of it all, my dad's illness, Paige's manipulations, and now this elaborate character assassination, felt too heavy to bear. I started packing my bags, figuring I'd return to my small apartment and try to process everything that had happened. But then, in a twist I never saw coming, Lily stepped up in a way that left me awestruck. As I was shoving clothes into my duffel bag, Lily burst into the room where my dad, Paige, Annie, and I were all gathered. Her face was pale, but her jaw was set with determination. "Stop," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "This isn't right. I have proof that Mom and Aunt Annie are lying." The room fell silent. Paige's face drained of color, while Annie's eyes darted nervously between Lily and my dad. Lily pulled out her phone and, with trembling fingers, played a recording. The voices of Paige and Annie filled the room, crystal clear and undeniably damning. They were gleefully planning the entire scheme, laughing about how easy it would be to fool my gullible, drugged-up father and get me cut out of the will. They discussed every detail, the fake texts, the forged documents, even coaching Annie on how to cry convincingly. "Once Jack is out of the picture," Paige's voice said, "we'll have access to all of Tom's money. That little teacher's salary of his won't get him far if he tries to fight us in court." My dad's face crumpled as he listened. He looked older than I'd ever seen him, the weight of betrayal evident in every line of his face. When the recording ended, he turned to Paige and Annie, his voice barely above a whisper. "Get out, both of you. Now." Paige tried to protest, claiming the recording must be fake, but her excuses fell flat. Annie burst into tears, real ones this time, babbling apologies and trying to blame everything on Paige. But my dad was beyond listening to either of them. With a strength I didn't know he still possessed, he stood up and pointed to the door. "I said get out. I never want to see either of you again." As Paige and Annie slunk out of the room, my dad turned to me. Tears were streaming down his face as he opened his arms. "Jack, son, I'm so sorry," he choked out. "I should have known better. Can you ever forgive me?" I crossed the room in 2 strides and embraced him, my own tears flowing freely. We stood there for a long moment, both of us shaking with emotion. When we finally pulled apart, my dad turned to Lily. "Thank you," he said softly. "You showed tremendous courage today." Lily, looking drained but relieved, gave a small smile. "I couldn't let them destroy your relationship," she said. "It wasn't right." In the days that followed, my dad and I had several long, heartfelt conversations. He admitted that he'd allowed Paige to come between us over the years, prioritizing his fear of being alone over his relationship with me. He expressed deep regret for the distance that had grown between us, and for doubting me when Annie made her accusations. We talked about Mom, about our years together after her death, and about the gradual erosion of our bond. It was painful at times, but also cathartic. It felt like we were finally lancing a festering wound, allowing it to properly heal at last. My dad has rewritten his will, choosing to split everything equally between me and Lily. She proved herself to be family in a way Paige never did, he told me. Paige, predictably, is threatening to contest the will. She's been calling and leaving nasty voicemails, alternating between threats and attempts at manipulation. We've blocked her number and are working with my dad's lawyer to ensure everything is airtight legally. I'm still processing everything that's happened. The emotional whiplash of the past few weeks has left me feeling drained and somewhat shell-shocked. But underneath it all, there's a current of cautious optimism. I have my dad back, and we're making the most of the time we have left together. It's not a happy ending. His prognosis hasn't changed. But it's far better than I could have hoped for when I first wrote my original post. Lily and I have been supporting each other through all of this. I'm incredibly grateful for her bravery in coming forward with the recording. She's struggling with conflicting emotions about her mom, and I'm doing my best to be there for her as she works through it all. There's still a long road ahead, with my dad's declining health and the potential legal battles with Paige looming on the horizon. But for now, I'm focusing on rebuilding my relationship with my dad and creating some final, precious memories together. Thank you again to everyone who offered support and advice. Your kindness has meant more than you know. Update 2. It's been about a month since my last update, and I felt compelled to share the latest developments in this ongoing saga. With a heavy heart, I must report that my father passed away last week. His health declined rapidly towards the end, faster than any of us expected. The last few weeks were a whirlwind of hospital visits, conversations with hospice care workers, and precious moments stolen in between. Despite the sadness of losing him, I'm incredibly grateful for the time we had together in his final weeks. Without the cloud of Paige and Annie's lies hanging over us, we were able to reconnect in a way I hadn't thought possible. We spent hours talking, reminiscing about old times and sharing stories we'd never told each other before. One evening, as the sun was setting outside his hospital room window, my dad started telling me about my mom. He shared anecdotes from their early dating days that I'd never heard before, like how on their third date, Mom got food poisoning from bad sushi and Dad stayed up all night taking care of her. That's when I knew she was the one, he said with a wistful smile. Anyone who could make puking seem endearing had to be special. He also opened up about how hard her death had been on him. I was so lost without her, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I think that's why I clung to Paige so tightly. I was terrified of being alone again. His honesty in those moments meant everything to me. Lily was there for much of it too. My dad made a point of telling her how much he appreciated her honesty and bravery in exposing Paige and Annie's plot. You're as much my daughter as if you were my own flesh and blood, he told her one afternoon. I saw Lily tear up at his words. Paige tried to force her way in to see my dad a couple of times, claiming she wanted to apologize and make amends, but my dad was firm in his refusal to see her. I don't want my last days tainted by her presence, he said resolutely. We respected his wishes and had security escort her out when she showed up unannounced. The funeral was held last weekend. It was a small, intimate affair, just me, Lily, and a handful of my dad's oldest friends. We shared stories and raised a toast to his memory with his favorite whiskey. It was exactly the kind of send-off he would have wanted. Unfortunately, even death couldn't put an end to Paige's dramatics. She showed up at the funeral uninvited, causing a scene and demanding to be let in. When we refused, she started wailing loudly about how cruel we were being to her in her time of grief. It was an ugly spectacle that marred what should have been a peaceful remembrance. Security had to physically remove her from the premises. The will reading was yesterday. As my dad had stated, he left his estate split equally between me and Lily. Paige was left the minimum required by law for a spouse, which isn't much in our state. Predictably, she flew into a rage when this was revealed. "This is all your fault," she screeched at me, her face contorted with fury. "You turned him against me. I'll contest this. I'll take everything." Her lawyer, looking uncomfortable, tried to calm her down. I overheard him quietly telling her that she doesn't have much of a case, given the circumstances and the clear statement of my dad's wishes. but Paige seems determined to drag this out as long as possible, no matter how futile it might be. I'm trying not to let the threat of a prolonged legal battle overshadow my grief or the positive memories of my dad's final weeks. My dad's lawyer assures me that the will is solid and that Paige's claims don't hold water. Still, the thought of potentially dealing with her drama for months or even years to come is exhausting. Lily and I have been leaning on each other a lot through all of this. Our shared experiences over the past few months have brought us closer than I ever thought possible. She's really struggling with her mom's behavior and feeling conflicted about everything that's happened. I'm doing my best to be there for her, reminding her that she did the right thing in exposing the truth, no matter how difficult it was. As for me, I'm still in that strange, surreal phase of grief where it doesn't quite feel real that my dad is gone. Some days, I find myself reaching for the phone to call him before I remember. Other days, the weight of his loss hits me all at once, and it's hard to even get out of bed. I'm focusing on honoring my dad's memory in the ways I can. I've started volunteering at a local cancer support group, something I know would make him proud. I'm also thinking of using part of my inheritance to set up a scholarship fund in my parents' names at the high school where I teach. There will likely be more drama to come with Paige and the estate, but I'm trying not to let that overshadow the precious memories of my final weeks with my dad. We were able to heal old wounds and reconnect in a way I'll always be grateful for. Whatever happens with the legal side of things, nothing can take that away from me.